Hey guys, welcome to this year's Summit, Homeschooling Summit 2020. And rejoining us this year is Jeremy Stuart, the filmmaker and director of movies Class Dismissed and Self-Taught. Jeremy, thanks again so much for joining us this year. It's a pleasure to speak with you again.
Likewise, thanks, Daniel. It's great to be invited back.
And for any younger viewers that might be watching this, can you just describe the house that you're living in right now?
Yeah, I want to make it really clear that this is not my house behind me here. This is actually a fake background, and it's the home of the Incredibles from the Incredibles 2 Pixar movie. But I don't live there, you know. I wish I did.
Who would you be? Which Incredible?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I'd be my own Incredible. I'd have to come up with some sort of superpower. I don't know what that would be. So, I'll have to ponder that one. That's a good question.
Okay, man. Well, there you go. If you were wondering, like young people, hi, I know that house. There, you know why.
It looks vaguely familiar.
Yeah. So, Jeremy, last time we spoke, you were literally just about to launch your movie Self-Taught. So we're a year on from that. But before we get into that, I want to touch on your original movie, Class Dismissed, for any new viewers that are coming to the summit this year and learning about you for the first time. Could you just walk us through the movie Class Dismissed and what drove you to make it, and what was the message that you were trying to get across?
Right. So yeah, and we think about when I actually started it. I think it was in 2010. I was pretty new to homeschooling myself. So I currently have a daughter who's almost 16, and she's never been to school. And so early on in our homeschooling adventure as a family, we were doing obviously lots of research and trying to figure out what direction was best for us. And as you do, you're trying to sort of get resources and figure out, well, how does this work, and where should we be turning for information? And there's lots of books out there and websites and things that we were looking into. But I started doing a little bit of research into films. I thought, well, I wonder if there's any documentaries out there that are about homeschooling. And surprisingly, there wasn't. There was a few little YouTube videos and things like that, but there was nothing extensive. And so as a filmmaker, I thought, well, here's an opportunity. It seems like maybe this would be an interesting documentary to make, is a film all about homeschooling. Because I think one of the things people struggle with when they jump into this idea of homeschooling is, well, how do you do it? What does it look like? Well, what's an average day? Or what are we supposed to do? Or what happens over time? And books sometimes don't really give you that information, and it's a lot to read. So I thought it would be fascinating if I was to find a family who were just about to jump into homeschooling and follow their journey and kind of document it. So this was the challenge I took on in 2010. Little did I know that it was going to take nearly 5 years to complete that film. So I spent 5 years working on it, and we found a fantastic family in Los Angeles who had actually registered their kids at one of the best schools in the LA area. They had moved there from Utah, and specifically for that school, and it wasn't working very well at all. They were very disappointed with what was happening. The kids were kind of bored and unengaged, and they didn't really know why. And so the mother, Rachel, in the film, was looking for some options. And so she decided to pull them out of this school and homeschool them. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to document their entire journey, which took 2 years, which is one of the reasons why the film took so long, is we followed them for about 2 years. And as they pulled their kids out of school, they tried, different techniques. Should they do curriculum at home? Should they do classical curriculum? Should they do this style? They were sort of fumbling around and trying different things, which is normal. That's kind of what you do, is you have to find what works for your own particular family. And so all of that got documented, and it took quite some time. Anyway, long story short, the film was finally released in 2015, and I was exhausted. And I thought, well, that was fun. Now I have this little film that's all about homeschooling, and it covered a lot of ground. It talked about a lot of different styles of homeschooling, and we interviewed many other people along the way. It wasn't just this one family's adventure or experience. There was lots of experts that weighed in, and I traveled all around the country. But I thought, okay, well, what's going to happen now with this film? You know, I sort of thought, well, it's just going to be a small little thing, and maybe a few people will see it, and that'll be that. And little did I know that it was going to really take off. So I did a tour of movie theaters all around the US, and actually sold out every single screening, which was really shocking. And then since that time, the movie's now been translated into 5 languages and is screened in more than 60 countries around the world and continues to do pretty well today. So it far exceeded my expectations for, you know, what the film, you know, the reason I made the film in some regards was not only to kind of gather a lot of information and data together about homeschooling that might be helpful to other people, but also for part of my own journey, just to kind of educate myself, like what's out there, what are people doing, who are these people, and what are all the different approaches that they take. But little did I know the film was going to kind of go on and live this life of its own now, and help many people around the world. So I'm very proud of that accomplishment. So the other thing that happened, though, is in the course of doing that film and speaking to people at screenings and doing Q&As and things, I got many questions from people in the audiences about, well, you know, homeschooling sounds fine when they're little, you know, when they're young, and you know, maybe even through middle school. But what about high school, and what happens beyond high school? Like, how are these kids going to get into college? How are they going to get jobs? Are they even going to be able to get into college if they've never been to school? And things like this, right? And these are very important and very valid questions, and they kept coming up over and over and over again. And the film Class Dismissed talks about that a little bit, I mean, but it doesn't really get into depth about what does happen to kids who have not been traditionally schooled. You know, how do they fare in the world? Are they quote unquote successful? And I use quotes there because I think our definition of success is very limited in our culture. So, for example, you know, we sort of define success as, well, you go to school, you get good grades, then you go to university, you get a degree, you get a good job, well paid, you buy the house, and blah, blah, blah. That's quote unquote success. But I think that's a very narrow view of looking at what it means to be happy and successful in life. So, so I thought, this question keeps coming up. Maybe there's something there that needs to be explored. And I personally felt that I wasn't completely done with the subject, even though I covered a lot of ground in Class Dismissed. I felt like there's a little more to say here, and the fact that this question keeps coming up is really important. And I think as a filmmaker also, you know, we're sort of intimately involved in the subject matter. Otherwise, we wouldn't spend all this time making a film. So perhaps the question was one that I was asking as well. Well, what does happen? What's going to happen to my daughter? You know, she's never been to school. So maybe exploring that was sort of a personal quest as well. So I decided to make a second film, and that's Self-Taught. And Self-Taught followed the stories of 6 really remarkable young adults that I tracked down from different parts of the country who had never been to school. Some of them had never set foot in a school. Some of them had a tiny bit of schooling and then were pulled out to homeschool. Most of them were unschooled, so they never followed any kind of curriculum. In fact, they were all unschooled. So not your sort of traditional curriculum-based homeschooling journeys, very eclectic, very just sort of follow your passion type of interest type thing. And I thought this would be an interesting film to, again, these stories would be very interesting to document. And part of the questions that I was trying to answer in that film was, you know, I asked all of the subjects in the film the same questions, more or less, is, you know, how did they feel their untraditional or non-traditional education has helped or hindered them in doing what they're doing now with their lives? And, you know, the age ranges in the film, that they're in the sort of late 20s, early 30s. So they're out there in the world doing their thing. And I wanted to ask that question. And then I also wanted to ask them how they defined success for themselves. What's their definition of success, and do they consider themselves successful? So So that was the second film, and that one took a lot less to make. That was only about a 2.5 year process. I think I had it down by then, and I knew a lot of people, so it was a lot easier to just sort of find people. And it was a very different type of film in that I wasn't following one particular family's journey. With Class Dismissed, I had to let that particular family's journey unfold, however long it took, until it arrived at a place where I felt like there was some sort of resolution to the story, or they were in a place that felt good, which is why it took so long. And with self-taught, that wasn't the case. I simply found a handful of very interesting people, and spent a little bit of time with them and interviewed them. And so the film came together fairly quickly. So I feel like personally now, at least for me, I've answered a lot of my own questions about what is homeschooling, what are the different approaches you can take, how does it work, why does it work, and what happens to these kids when they become adults and move into the world as productive citizens. What kinds of things do they do, and what are their stories? So, you asked a little bit earlier about, we were chatting a little bit before you started recording here about, are there any future projects? At the moment, no. At the moment, no. And I think I may be done with this particular subject personally at this point. I feel like I've really gone deep into that rabbit hole, as deep as maybe I want to go at this point, but you never know. So.
Yeah, and I remember like last year when we were talking, it was right around the time of release, and you were very excited about going to the Aero conference, Jerry Mintz's conference, who's again come back on this year to speak, and release that. Was that the first live showing that you ever released? And
yes, that that was the first time anyone had seen the film.
How did that?
That's always a really nerve-wracking experience, because you live with it for so long and you sort of lose perspective, and so it's always interesting to screen it for an audience and sort of gauge the reaction and see how people respond to it. Admittedly, an audience that is very much involved in alternative education, so in a sense, among friends, it wasn't so much a public screening, but the reception was very good, and I was really happy with people's response to the film. And I think a lot of the comments I got were that it was a very valuable sort of coda, if you like, to Class Dismissed. It sort of took the story just a little bit further, and I think that was important, which is kind of what my intention was in the first place.
And I remember last year asking you about Class Dismissed, your original movie, and how that had changed people's lives. Certain people had reached out to you and found you and thanked you. Have you had the same experience since releasing Self-Taught? Have you had people reaching out, it's perhaps allayed some of the fears that they had about their kids' homeschooling journey and worrying about going to college or university? Is anything like that stuck out?
Yeah, there have definitely been a number of people that have reached out directly to me after seeing the film and saying how much they appreciated this particular message of the film, because they had kids who were deciding whether they were going to go to college or not, and obviously it's a big step for a lot of parents, and wondering if that's going to happen or not, and if not, then what, and I think the film really helped kind of address some of those issues and concerns. And I had one woman that emailed me and said that the film made her cry. But it was actually Peter Gray. I interviewed Peter Gray in the film, and at the end of the film, he has just this wonderful, wonderful message where he says, at the end of the day, are you going to be? I'm sort of paraphrasing here. I can't remember the exact line, but he says, "Are you going to be happy that your kid got into Harvard, or are you going to be happy that they had a wonderful life and were happy in themselves?" Something like that. The point being is we put so much emphasis on college being the sort of be-all instigator of future happiness, as opposed to really looking at, well, you want your kids to just be happy in life. But he says it in such a beautiful way, and it's right at the end of the film. And that particular moment really touched this one woman who emailed me directly about it. I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know, when you work, something that you've put so much hard work and effort into, you know, touches somebody in such an emotive way. Yeah, it's brilliant. What I want to ask you a question. We were talking a little bit before we started recording about what's happening now, post COVID, or still in COVID in some countries at time of recording. Um, the spike that we expect to see with homeschooling, certainly the interest around homeschooling and the kind of um, feel that you're getting. What do you expect to happen?
That's a really big, loaded question. Yeah, I mean, we are at an absolutely unprecedented moment on a lot of levels, of course. But you know, from an educational standpoint, you know, most of the world's children right now are not in school. That's never happened. And the only time that's ever happened was before schooling was, you know, implemented in the first place. So this is a really big deal. And I'm hearing from a lot of people, there's a lot of confusion, panic, fear, unknown and uncertainty about what's going to happen with schooling, traditional schooling, once things start to resume to normal and some of these you know, restrictions are lifted. And so, for instance, in the US where I live, you know, the CDC just recently released some guidelines as to what schools should look like, or the recommendations and guidelines as to how schools should safely open in the fall, in September. And I read through those guidelines, and it's pretty horrific. It's, I mean, I've always felt schools were a little bit like a prison anyway, but this is really, really like a prison. And you read through those guidelines, and I think any person with any sense, any parent with any sense would be like, there's no way I'm sending my kid to that type of environment. Just really horrifying. Now, you know, whether all of those recommendations will be implemented or not remains to be seen, of course. There's a lot of variables there. But the point is I think this opportunity that people have had, excuse me, this opportunity that people have had in the last couple of months of this sort of lockdown to have their kids at home, to spend more time with their kids, has been hopefully really beneficial for a lot of people. And maybe a lot of people have woken up and realized, you know what, this is kind of a nice situation. I mean, I'm not saying it's not been without struggle. There's certainly been a lot of difficulties and struggles for families trying to manage this, you know, juggle work, and now your kids are home all day. They don't have that free babysitting at school. You know, it's been challenging. And I've been hearing from a lot of parents that are really stressed about it. But I've also been hearing from a lot of parents that are starting to say, well, this is pretty good. Like, we've sort of got this now. Like, we've hit our stride. We found something that's working for us. And maybe we'll not send them back. Now, you know, admittedly, there's been this strange kind of hybrid thing going on with online schooling. You know, a lot of schools that had the capacity to do so immediately switched to online lessons and things like that, lesson plans. And the kids essentially are still in school, but they're just doing most of it from home, online. That is not homeschooling. I want to make that really clear. That's a very different thing than homeschooling, because at that point you're still in a public certified school, following the school curriculum, following the school standards, being tested, being graded and evaluated with all the trappings and trimmings that school provides. You're still doing that. You just happen to be doing it at home online. That's not homeschooling. And I know I've been hearing stories of a lot of parents who have really struggled with that too. And you know, maybe that system has kind of opened their eyes as to what is really going on in schools. And they've seen firsthand what their kids have to deal with in school, with all of this testing and grading and papers and curriculums and schedule and so on and so forth. And maybe they're seeing, wow, that's awful. Like, forget that. Let's not do that. Let's not do the online schooling thing anymore. Let's do something else. And so I think that becomes one of the questions that everyone's grappling with. You know, what do we do now? Do we continue doing online schooling? Do we send our kids back Do we just bail on the whole thing and figure out what we're going to do on our own? Because, hey, you know, we maybe you've got it down now. We're seeing some benefits to this. So it's a really interesting time, Daniel, and I'm very curious to see what's going to happen in September when schools start to consider, you know, going back, or what they're actually going to do moving forward. Which, you know, which means that there's a huge influx of interest in alternative ways of becoming educated, including homeschooling. So, so it's an interesting time, very interesting time.
Yeah, for sure. And if we just stick on this topic, just to round it out completely, I think I had a conversation with Jerry about this, that there's going to be teachers that are going to be, you know, much better suited to remote teaching, and they're going to be able to go location independent, and they're going to be able to find a little bit more freedom and teach the way they want to teach, and teach the subjects they're passionate about, rather than follow the same curriculum year in, year out. And that excites me.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. That's a really important thing, because I think, again, you know, I think schools are really struggling. Teachers are really struggling trying to figure all this out. And the point you make there is really terrific and important, because yes, clearly online learning is going to play a big role in people's lives moving forward, regardless of whether they're using the online learning with a traditional school or whether they're just using online learning to learn whatever they want to learn. You know, of course, I would lean on the side of learn whatever you want to learn. Forget the school curriculum. You've got the world at your fingertips, and teachers certainly have an incredible opportunity now to completely redefine themselves. And teachers have been struggling just as much as kids have in schools, with being stuck in a system that no longer works. It hasn't worked in decades. That they're bound by the rules and the regulations of the school. And I know it's incredibly frustrating for teachers. I've spoken to many of them. I've had them at my screenings who have come up and expressed how excited they were by some of the ideas, you know, that I had in my film, but then unable to enact any of them. So this is a perfect opportunity for them to completely redefine themselves and offer themselves as mentors and tutors and online guides to kids who want to learn about anything. I mean, this is the great thing, is that you can learn anything you want online at any time. And that's always been the case, of course, but now it's become the way to learn because everybody's having to do it right now. So it's a very interesting, I feel like we're on the precipice of an incredible paradigm shift. Really dramatic paradigm shift, one that we've not seen in a long time when it comes to education and access to information. So it's going to be very interesting to see how people navigate that.
Is this our chance, Jeremy? Is this our chance? Is this the decade that we can change education and rebuild it from the ground up to suit and serve more people? Because, like, as you said, the current system for decades, I mean, who has that served in reality? You know, if it hasn't served the parents, it hasn't served the kids, hasn't served the teachers, you know, first principle thinking, who has it been serving then, and why?
Well, it's been serving the big corporations, the curriculum makers, the text and test makers, the you know, the big money people. It's yeah, ultimately it doesn't serve the teachers and it doesn't serve the kids, and it hasn't done it in a long time. It may serve the parents a little bit in that it is essentially free babysitting. It's a place their kids can go for the day so that they can work. And I know one of the challenges that a lot of parents are facing right now, if they still have jobs, how do you work from home and at the same time keep your kids occupied and entertained and interested and engaged in things? It's a big juggling act, but this is what all homeschooling parents have always done. This juggling act, you know, that's part of it. It's not, you know, I've always said in the past that homeschooling is not just an educational choice, it's a lifestyle choice. And I think a lot of people now have been sort of, you know, have had an opportunity to experience that lifestyle choice. And for many of them, it's not going to work. They can't wait for their kids to go back to school. And no matter what restrictions they put in place in terms of safety in schools moving forward, they're going to send their kids back to school. And, you know, that's fine if they feel like that's going to work for them and their kids. I have big problems with that personally. When I see the kinds of things that they're going to, if you thought school was restrictive before, it's going to be horrifically restrictive, really detrimental to students' health. So on a lot of levels. So anyway, I think that yes, this is our opportunity, Daniel, to really be instigators and supporters of a new shift, a new paradigm towards learning in a completely new and liberated way.
Yeah, I agree.
It's exciting. It's exciting. It's really exciting.
It's truly, this opportunity comes along once in a lifetime, right? Or
right.
a couple of centuries. You get the chance to redesign a system from the ground up. I just hope it happens. I hope it, because if we just go back to what it was, there are too many problems with it. Right. Blessing. So
I just want to say one before you ask the next question. You just said something that I just want to kind of dig into a little bit. You said, here's an opportunity to redesign a system from the ground up. I don't think we should be redesigning any system. That's the issue right there. The fact that the school is a system that has been ingrained into our society is the problem. School is the problem. It's not the teachers, it's the system. So, this idea of trying to design a new system from the ground up, I think is a false idea. I think that each individual person needs to find what works for them. We need to take the power back as families, as parents, to decide for ourselves how our children will be educated. And it's not part of a system. It's part of an individual personal choice. And I think that's really, really important.
It's great you bring that up, actually, because living here in France, I remember the first address to the nation about closing schools because of COVID and going into lockdown. And the next day, the French education minister, there was a note from the French education minister along the lines of, we, worry not, citizens, we will do everything in our power to make sure that your children will not suffer during. And I was reading it thinking, man, you just got no idea how good this is. Just leave everybody alone. And then just signs off with, something along the lines of, we know you do not have the pedagogic training to bring up your children or to educate your children. And it just made me so damn angry. But that is the belief that the people at the top truly have somehow managed to convince not only themselves but everybody else around them that the way they do it and the way they set the curriculum is, it's for our own good, and we're not good enough to teach our own children. And when people talk about homeschooling for the first time, the first fear that strikes them is, I'm not smart enough to teach my kid.
Right. I'm not a teacher.
Right.
Right, but see, that's a direct result of being conditioned by a system that was put in place to dumb us down, to make us think that the only way you can be educated is to go to an institution called a school and listen to these so-called experts all day long who supposedly know all the answers. That's the problem right there, and that's been the problem for a long time. That is now becoming unraveled in a really big way. There's no validity to that argument whatsoever anymore. And in my film Self-Taught, I highlight six unique individuals who didn't go through that system, and they're doing some pretty amazing things in the world without being part of that system. Yeah, and everybody has that ability. All parents have the ability to teach their kids. They're the parents. They know their kids better than anybody. And no, you don't have to be a teacher. If your child wants to learn about astrophysics and you know nothing about it, go online, start doing some research, find people in your neighborhood, maybe there's a retired math teacher down the street who can help. There's so many resources available. You don't have to be the person that is the teacher. I think already that's a problem, saying that you're the teacher and they're the student, because that's a separation right there. It's a separation between I have all the knowledge and you don't. as opposed to, no, look, the knowledge is all around us. How do we tap into it? We can do it together. And that's a really big, important shift.
I think a lot of anxiety that has been going on in families that have been pushed into this corner, not out of their own choice, because I've experienced it. And I've spoken to many other homeschoolers about this, other parents. And especially like in this situation right now, if you're just getting the school at home, the emails every day from the school, to your point earlier, this is not homeschooling. This is just your kid trying to follow the curriculum at the kitchen table. And when they ask you for help and you have a look at what they're studying and you have no idea, you can't help, that sparks memories in your own heart and in your own mind of like how much you probably didn't like school and how much like you actually wanted to get out of that system yourself. And it brings up this fear. That's where the fear lies, like, oh my God, I can't teach my own kid.
Right. Right. But you can. And, you know, that's the thing. It's like, because you can find resources online or in books or anywhere else just as easily as you ever could. I mean, see, the other thing I have an issue with is that this system, this indoctrination that we've all bought into, is that there's a period of time called school years where you learn everything. And then prior to that and after that, you don't learn anything. Like you have to go to school during that 16 years or 12 years or whatever it is to learn. But that's not the case. You're learning all the time. All the time. It's impossible to go a day without learning something. Literally impossible. And you know, the younger you are, of course, kids are like sponges. They're learning they're learning huge amounts all the time, even if it doesn't look like traditional learning, even if they're not sitting with a workbook and doing things on a test, you know, on sheet. They're still learning stuff. If they're on playing games or they're, you know, running around playing sports or whatever it is they're doing, they're learning something about the world. And all of that is valid. All of it is valuable. But we don't look at it like that. We think, oh, they should be in a classroom at school because that's where learning happens. And that is simply not the case and has never been the case. And you know, the situation that we find ourselves in now is hopefully proving to a lot of families at home that, wow, okay, yeah, maybe we've bought into something here that's a false, you know, false structure. It's like a house of cards. You know, you pull one card out and the whole thing just falls apart. It's kind of like that. And I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to that.
Yeah, for sure. So where can people come and find your movies, Jeremy, so we can point people in the right direction and come and watch Class Dismissed and come and watch Self-Taught and learn a little bit more about yourself and your work?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so well, both the films are available online for streaming or download, and Class Dismissed is at classdismissedmovie.com, and Self-Taught is at selftaughtmovie.com. So, and I'm sure you'll post links as well. So pretty straightforward there. But yeah, you can rent them and download them and look at them there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And before we sign off, I remember asking you this question at the end of last year's interview. So you might remember it. If there was one person in the world that you could show your movies to, Class Dismissed and Self-Taught, who would that person be and why?
Gosh, yeah, you know, I don't remember what I said last year. I think I think I do. I think I said the Secretary of Education, right?
Correct.
Is that right? I can't remember, but anyway, that wouldn't be the case now. You know, I'm not sure that I can answer that now, Daniel. I think that if what I want is for as many people as possible to see it, because I really want to help people figure this out. You know, I really feel for those families who are struggling right now. They're terrified. You know, school has always been there, and now all of a sudden it looks like it's not, or it's going to look so different. They don't know what to do with it, and they're looking for solutions. They're looking for answers. And I really hope that my films can at least give them encouragement and support them and give them the courage to move forward and to experiment and to find what works for them, because that's what all this is really about, is to find what works for you. And it's totally possible. And both of my films talk about it in different ways. These kids turn out great. There's nothing to worry about. You just got to trust it. And so if to answer your question, who would I most want my movie to be seen by? Everybody who's struggling right now.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great answer. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for your time and for coming back this year and sharing all of your knowledge and your experience, because you've been in this community and serving this community for so long that really appreciate you coming back.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Daniel. It's a pleasure. And maybe I'll run off now and see if I can find my super suit to put on.
You go do that. See you, man. Thank you.
All right. Take care.